Hi, welcome back to the channel. This week we're going to create a bassline in Pigments. So for those who have been following the channel for the past few weeks, you'll know that I'm quite a big fan of Pigments and I've been using it a lot lately. So let's try and create a bassline in it. Firstly, just for reference so you know what we're working with, this is what I currently have with a Serum bassline for now that I'm looking to potentially replace. It sounds quite good, but I just want to maybe mix it up a bit. So let's mute our trusty Serum and then open up Pigments, and we have the default patch here. For those who have a different view of Pigments upon opening, that's only because I have gone to new preset here, and then in Cubase I have right clicked and done default preset, save as default preset. Mine always opens as this now. I'm sure most DAWs have this functionality. There's nothing special there. Now, obviously, Pigments is very capable of doing a bassline, that goes without saying, but there are some peculiarities, let's say, in Pigments that you need to be aware of. Let's turn the utility engine off, the sample engine or the second engine is off also, and then let's go to analog first. Let's have an experiment with analog. Unison we want off, and then let's turn FM off. They're not doing anything, but let's just turn them off anyway. Play this back and we have the following, which sounds obviously terrible. Let's put the filter down a bit. Let's assign that to LFO 2, so envelope 2. You can obviously use the functions here in the same way. You put it to 1/16th and then you turn it to envelope mode, but we're going to go old school today and use envelopes. Turn the attack to 0. Let's just make sure that you're not doing that break at the end there so we don't get the silence. When we look at the amp envelope, you'll notice that it is on 1 millisecond. And the reason for that is there's quite a nasty click at the start. You might like that actually, but I particularly don't. Let's hear that. So you can hear that click at the start. So the reason I'd sure you have done 1 second is to get rid of that clickiness. But what we can do is turn it down where it's barely audible. Let's go 0.4 for now, because you want quite a strong attack, but we also don't want that clickiness. Let's also just turn off the effects. There's nothing happening there at the moment anyway, but let's just turn them off just to be sure. Now, as I said at the start, Pigments, despite being fantastic, there are some peculiarities you need to be aware of. And for basslines, it is this, that by default, the drift knob here is 0.01. And the reason for that is to mimic the, well, it says there, the drift or the variability in the analog oscillators. And if you're replicating an analog synth, that's exactly what you want. It sounds fantastic, but we don't want that. We want, for a Psytrance bassline, we want it to be machine gun-like. So let's turn the drift all the way down to 0. Play this back. So before we commit to that bassline, I just want to test something with this analog oscillator. We're going to duplicate this track and play them both back. Nothing special there at all. It's basically just double the volume because we now have 2 channels playing identical sounds. Let's open up the channel strip of the second one and we're going to flip the phase. Now, if these two basslines are identical, there'll be nothing coming out of the speakers because they'll be perfectly out of phase. So one completely offsets the other. So let's test. And you can hear that that's certainly not the case. We are hearing that little wavy, kind of unpleasant, phased sound. If we turn the drift up, you'll hear it get more and more prominent. So what that means is, despite having drift all the way down to 0, there is still some analogness, if you like, or variability in these oscillators. And as I said, we don't want that. So that means that the analog engine, for this case anyway, is out of the equation. We're not going to use that. So let's remove the duplicate, go back to the original one, Let's close the analog. Let's skip over engine 2 for the moment and let's go to utility engine, turn that on. You'll notice in here we have two types of noise we can select, but down the bottom we have a oscillator, which then we can use a saw. Let's play this back. Let's turn this up. So that sounds quite similar to how we had it. But let's do the same test now. Let's duplicate. Open up the channel strip, flip the phase, and now playing these back, we have absolute dead silence. So that means that the saw in the utility engine is perfectly capable of a Sybase, whereas the one in analog is not. And if you just want a basic, bass, then that's perfectly fine. If you just want the saw, then that works perfectly well. But it doesn't really give much more room for flexibility later. So let's turn off the utility engine and let's go, first of all, let's remove this one. And let's do it in the original one. Let's turn off the utility engine, go to the sample engine. We're going to change that to wavetable. Turn off the morph and then turn the position up so it snaps perfectly to saw. Play this back. Turn off unison, we never want that for a bass. We'll never say never, but in this case we don't. Now, the peculiarity or the, let's say, thing to be aware of in this one is you want to have the phase mod set to key and the phase modulation down to 0. If you don't, that will essentially replicate or give a similar effect to the analog drift that we had in the first example. So let's double check. Key, which we can see by the keys here, and then phase mod down to 0. Play this back. One more test, duplicate. Let's flip the phase and play back. Dead silence. So that means in addition to utility engine, our wavetable engine is also capable of a solid Psytrance bass. So now that we've decided that, we can remove the duplicates. Let's play back now the original one. And we've done our testing, so we can continue on with finalizing this patch now. So let's change it to MS-20. I like the grit of that. We can go to the effect section. Let's turn that on, but let's turn B and the aux off. Let's turn them down just to be sure. And we certainly don't want reverb or delay. But instead of removing the delay, let's change this one to a parametric EQ. And what we're going to do now is drag that one across. Doesn't make a difference. Let's get it out of the way. And the second one, the second node, let's drag this down. We want it around 300. Essentially just to remove the boxiness or the muddiness around the 300 Hertz mark, which really builds up in a bass line. And off. Sounds a lot better. Let's just check the levels. We wanted it -12. So it's way down now, -17.6. The best way I find, just to make it the maths easier, put it back to 0, play it back. It's currently -10, so now we know -2 to get that back to 12. Now with the kick, we have this. And with the full mix, I think it works quite well. That second's still a work in progress, so ignore that. So yeah, is Pigments capable of a Psytrance bass? Absolutely. Just ensure that the little tricks that we mentioned at the start, avoid the analog engine. You can use utility engine, but it is limited. So stick with the wavetable engine to get all this functionality should you want it later. It just keeps a bit of maneuverability there. And you have a solid machine gun-like Psytrance bassline. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.